A room full of the powerful people in Seoul, executives, politicians, old money that had never once questioned its right to be there. And every single one of them was laughing at the same woman. The gas station girl in a service uniform, serving their drinks. But then, 30 minutes later, an elderly European billionaire walked through those doors, crossed the entire ballroom, stopped in front of her and bowed. Not a greeting, not a courtesy, but a genuine bow, the kind that room had never seen given to anyone. Every conversation stopped, every glass went still, and the people who had laughed went completely, irreversibly silent. What happened in that room started at a gas station, and this is exactly how it started. The rain didn't stop for the black cars, but the rest of the station did. 3 hours into her shift, Valencia was wiping down the pumps when the formation turned off the highway. 6 black vehicles, moving with a precision that turned the forecourt into a tactical zone. Before a single door opened, the air grew heavy. Mama Joy, inside the office, straightened her uniform. The junior attendants suddenly found reasons to study the pavement. Valencia kept her eyes on the display. She knew the type. The lead vehicle stopped, and 4 men in sharp, charcoal suits stepped out. They weren't here for gas, they were here to own the space. They walked toward the pumps with the arrogant stride of men who expected the world to clear a path. One of them, halfway through a container of food, tossed the crumpled wrapper onto the wet concrete right at Valencia's feet. He didn't look at her. He didn't even acknowledge she was standing there. He just gestured loosely toward the ground. "Clean it up," he said, not breaking his conversation with the others. Valencia didn't flinch. She watched the wrapper soak into the rain-slicked pavement, then looked up at him. Her voice was steady, utterly devoid of the fear he clearly expected. "The trash bin is by the door, sir." The man stopped. The laughter among his group died instantly, replaced by a tense, ugly silence. He looked at her as if she had just slapped him. To him, this wasn't a request for cleanliness, it was an act of defiance. A servant had dared to correct his manners. That was the trigger. The mockery turned visceral. He didn't pick up the trash. He leaned in, his face tight with sudden, wounded ego. They began to ridicule her uniform, laughing at the station, and loudly wagering on how many lifetimes it would take for a girl like her to even step foot in the elite ballrooms where Seoul's elite would be gathering that night. These men were enforcers for the city's most feared mafia boss. They were the ones who decided that a woman struggling to work in the rain was the perfect form of entertainment to soothe their bruised pride. Nearby customers pulled out their phones to record. They didn't have any business with her. They were just observers in a game of power they didn't understand. But for those long, suffocating minutes, it felt as if the entire station had decided exactly what she was worth. Valencia didn't argue, she didn't beg, she didn't even try to impress them. She simply stood there, a quiet, immovable object in the center of their noise. But then, the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. The man who stepped out didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the other customers. His gaze locked onto Valencia. He was tall, unhurried, and carried the kind of presence that forced the room to adjust to him. He didn't stop the mockery. He didn't defend her. He just watched. And as the men continued to laugh, oblivious to the silence of their boss, Valencia didn't look down. She looked right back at him. Mama Joy, watching from the office window, felt the temperature in the room drop. She had been watching powerful men arrive at this station for 11 years, but she had never seen one watch a woman like this. Like he was the one who had just lost something he hadn't yet realized he owned. But here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. The man watching her walk away in that moment was not used to being left, not by anyone. And something shifted in him right there beside a fuel pump, in a station he didn't yet know he was about to own. If you have ever been in a room full of people who look straight through you and chosen to keep moving anyway, then this story already belongs to you. Don't walk away from it now. Tap that button below and stay with Valencia. Because the people who leave at this point will never know what it costs a woman like her to finally let someone in. And what it costs him to realize, too late or just in time, exactly who he has been watching. Mr. Beek arrives at the station during Sihan's second visit, not dramatically. Just an older man moving through his own forecourt the way someone does when they have done it 10,000 times, checking things out of habit, not necessity. He notices the convoy. Stands quietly for a moment looking at the black vehicles the way a man looks at something he knows is coming for him eventually. Says nothing to anyone. Goes back inside. Mama Joy watches him go. Then looks at Valencia. Then back at the convoy. Valencia was restocking the supply shelf beside pump 4 when she heard the engines. She didn't look up immediately. She finished counting the stock, made her note on the clipboard and then looked up. He was already watching her. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second, the same duration she gave every customer who needed acknowledgement, and went back to her clipboard. Something crossed his face that Mama Joy, watching from the office window, could not immediately name. It wasn't irritation, it was closer to fascination. The kind a man develops when a puzzle refuses to resolve itself no matter how long he stares at it. One of his associates said something to him in low Korean. Sihan responded without looking away from Valencia. Later, Mama Joy would not be able to explain exactly how it happened. One moment Valencia was finishing her inventory. The next, a supplier on the phone was speaking in rapid French, disputing a delivery discrepancy. And before Mama Joy could find the station's translator card, Valencia had taken the phone. She handled it in under 2 minutes, fluent, precise, completely unbothered. She handed the phone back, picked up her clipboard and resumed counting. The forecourt was very quiet. Sihan had not moved. Mama Joy stepped out of the office, stood beside Valencia and watched the conv pull away in silence. Then she looked at the girl beside her, the one in the blue uniform with the oil smudge on her left sleeve, and said what she had been thinking since the very first day. Even in rags, a lion walks like a lion. Valencia said nothing, but her grip on the clipboard tightened just slightly. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she thought about how long she had planned to stay. It was raining the third time he came, not the convoy, not the formation. Just one vehicle, one driver, and Sihan stepping out alone with his collar up against the weather like a man who had somewhere else to be but had stopped here anyway. Valencia was on the forecourt. There was no avoiding it. He walked toward her with the kind of directness that made it clear he had made a decision before he arrived. "You speak French." It wasn't a question. "When the situation requires it," she said, reaching for his fuel cap. "What other situations have required it?" She glanced at him briefly. "That's a personal question for a first conversation. We've met 3 times. You've bought gas 3 times, she said. Something moved behind his eyes, not offense, not amusement exactly, something quieter than both. What would make it a conversation? She replaced the fuel cap and straightened up. "Honestly, I haven't decided yet." He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was casual. Then he reached into his coat, not for his wallet, she noticed, but for nothing. His hand simply rested there briefly. Like a man who had prepared something and then reconsidered it. "Not from Seoul," he said. "Neither observation nor question," she said. "What is that?" he said simply. She almost smiled. Almost, she turned toward the payment terminal, and that was when she saw it, a headline sliding across the news ticker on the small screen mounted above the register. "European delegation arrives in Seoul." Roth Industries representative among attendees. The screen cycled before she could read the rest. Her hand was steady when she processed his payment. Her pulse was not. She handed back his card without looking at his face. "Drive safe, Mr. Kwon." He paused. "You know my name." "I told you," she said quietly. "I know every customer." Sihan arrived just before 9, no conv, one vehicle at the far end of the forecourt. Valencia clocked the headlights without turning her head and kept working. The man came on foot. That was the first unusual thing. He came from the direction of the highway on-ramp, moving unevenly, a half-empty bottle hanging from one hand. His shirt was untucked. His shoes were the expensive kind that looked wrong on someone struggling to walk a straight line. He wasn't looking for fuel. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. That was the problem. He drifted toward Valencia the way drunk people drift toward light and movement, without decision, without intention, simply because something was there. She looked up, assessed the situation in 1 second, kept her voice even. "Sir, you need to step back from the pumps." He laughed at something she hadn't said, reached out and caught her arm to steady himself, fingers wrapping around her wrist without any awareness of what he was doing. The forecourt stopped. Sihan was already moving. He crossed the forecourt quietly, no urgency in his stride, and stopped directly behind the man. Close enough that the man felt it before he heard anything. Let go of her arm. His voice carried no heat, no performance, just the flat certainty of someone who has never needed volume to be understood. The man turned. Something cut through the alcohol fog, instinct, recognition, the specific feeling of having made a mistake, and he released Valencia's wrist and stepped back without being told twice. Sihan turned to Valencia. Whatever he expected from her, relief, gratitude, softness, he did not find it. What he found instead stopped him. "Why are you upset?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment, then away. "Because now everyone thinks I needed saving." He said nothing. She picked up the nozzle she had dropped and went back to work like the last 3 minutes had been a minor inconvenience. But Sihan stood in that forecourt for a long time after, turning those 6 words over and over, like a man who had just realized the rescue had cost her something he hadn't known to protect. Jinsu placed the file on the boardroom table without ceremony. "Oil and Go acquisition," he said. Legal flagged the timeline. The chain has been in sale conversations with 3 separate buyers for the past 4 months. Standard retirement exit, the owner approached us directly 6 weeks ago. Sihan looked at the file. Moderate revenue, 11 locations. The highway corridor properties have land value worth the purchase alone. Jinsu paused. Acquisition team recommended a standard closing timeline. Someone accelerated it by 6 weeks. Silence. Of all the chains to prioritize. Sihan turned a page. Location is strategic. Jinsu looked at him the way a man looks at someone he has known long enough to hear what is not being said. He picked up the file. Finalize the paperwork. Do that. Jinsu was at the door. A background check on the Mapo highway staff. He turned slowly. All staff. A short pause. Standard acquisition procedure, Sihan said. Jinsu nodded once and left. He did not believe that for a single second. Seo Jae-yoon was not Kwon Sihan's employee. She was something more complicated than that. The only daughter of one of Korea's most powerful political families, she had spent 3 years being quietly positioned as the woman who would eventually stand beside Sihan. Not because either of them had chosen it. Because it made sense to everyone around them, and in their world that had always been enough, she had her own office. Her own network. Her own people in places that mattered, the kind of people that existed in every government office in the city. And one of them had just sent her something interesting. She set her phone down slowly. Sihan had accelerated the oil and go acquisition. She pulled up the Mapo highway staff report her contact had forwarded and opened the attached photograph. She had seen that face before. She just couldn't place where yet. She opened a new window and started looking. Mr. Beek arrived before anyone else, 6:15 in the morning, the highway still quiet, the forecourt lights still running on their night setting. He moved through the station the way he always had, checking each pump housing the way a man checks something he built with his own hands and is seeing for the last time. Mama Joy watched him from the office. She knew what this walk meant. 20 minutes later, Valencia's phone buzzed on the break room table. Kwon Group finalizes acquisition of oil and go chain. She read it twice, set it face down. When Sihan arrived at 8, he didn't come with the convoy. He came alone, stepping out with the unhurried authority of a man reviewing an asset. He passed within 4 feet of her. Their eyes met, but neither changed pace. He walked into the office like the ground between them hadn't just permanently shifted. Valencia turned back to the pump. Her hands were steady. The rest of her was not. 20 minutes later, Mama Joy appeared beside her. She stood there saying nothing first, which was unusual enough on its own. Then she leaned close and said it quietly. In the tone of a woman delivering news she found equal parts alarming and fascinating. Child, your customer just became your boss. Valencia stared at the pump display. She thought about every reason to pack her bag and disappear into another city, another uniform, another version of invisible. Then she thought about why she came to Seoul in the first place. She tightened her grip on the nozzle and stayed exactly where she was. He came back on a Sunday, no security. No suited men, just Sihan in a dark jacket, stepping out of a single car like a man who had finally given himself permission to be somewhere without a reason prepared in advance. Valencia was wiping down the pumps. She didn't look up until he was standing there. Not here for fuel, she said. What makes you say that? Your tank was filled 4 days ago. A pause. You remember that? Remember all of them, she said, then quieter, yours more than most. She hadn't planned to say that, she felt it leave her mouth and didn't reach to take it back. Not what I expected, he said finally. You expected something. I always expect something, it's a problem. She stopped wiping and looked at him. The morning light was different here, away from the harsh overheads. He looked less like a chairman, more like a person. What did you expect? She asked. Someone performing. Instead, he said, I keep coming back to a gas station I now own and I still don't have an answer. Honesty of it landed between them. Mama Joy, watching from the doorway, stepped out slowly, unhurried, and stopped beside them on the pretense of checking the display. She spoke without looking at Sihan. Even in rags, a lion walks like a lion, Mr. Kwon. She tapped the display, turned, and walked back inside. Sihan looked at Valencia. A silence settled between them that was warmer than anything either of them was prepared to name. Then his phone buzzed. He read the message. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, the look of a man who just found the piece of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving. Drive safe, Mr. Kwon, she said. He got in his car and left without another word. Valencia stood on the forecourt, trying to remember how to breathe, while Sihan drove away, his mind already calculating the next step. Jaeyeon had a gift for making dangerous things look administrative. She had learned it from her father, a man who had spent 30 years in politics without ever once appearing to want anything he was actively engineering. The trick, he always said, was to make your target walk willingly through the door you built specifically for them. She opened the background check summary on her private laptop and read it for the third time. The results were not what bothered her. It was what wasn't there. No education records before age 19. Employment history that began 2 years ago and went nowhere before that. Financial records sealed under a legal framework she had never seen applied to a gas station worker. A face that kept pulling at something in her memory like a word she couldn't place. She had shown the photograph to 2 people she trusted. Both of them had gone quiet in a way that told her more than any answer would have. She closed the laptop and made a phone call. The assignment came through Mama Joy on a Wednesday morning, a charity gala. Seoul's annual foundation event. One of Kwon Group's newly acquired businesses, Oil and Go Muppa, had been selected to provide 2 staff members as part of a corporate community initiative. Front-facing hospitality support. One evening, formal dress provided, Mama Joy had accepted before Valencia reached the office. "It's good visibility for the station," she said, handing Valencia the briefing sheet. "New ownership wants to see the staff represent well." Valencia read the event details. Nothing about it felt unusual. A venue. A date, dress code, and a name at the bottom of the organizing committee, Sa Jaehyun. The name meant nothing to her. She folded the sheet and put it in her pocket. "What time do I need to be there?" 40 minutes across the city, in a venue that was still 3 days from opening its doors for the event. Jaehyun walked the ballroom floor with her event coordinator and mentally placed every guest at every table. She stopped at the service entrance. "Oil and Go staff," she said. "Make sure they're assigned to the main floor." The back corridor. Jaehyun looked at the ballroom, at the tables full of executives and politicians and old money that had never once questioned its own right to be in the room. "Nah," she said. "The main floor." She wanted witnesses, as many as possible. What she did not know, what no amount of careful planning had accounted for, was that Sihan had already confirmed his attendance. And that the elderly European name on the guest list, added quietly through a third-party invitation 2 days earlier, belonged to a man who had been looking for someone for 2 years. The ballroom was everything Valencia had spent 2 years avoiding: crystal, candlelight, the specific hum of people performing wealth at each other across tables that cost more to set than most families earned in a month. She moved through it in her service uniform with the same expression she wore at the pump. Neutral. Present, giving nothing away. It lasted 20 minutes before someone recognized her. As that the girl from the Muppa Stutpun's voice carried. They always do when they want to. At his, she was pumping fuel last Tuesday. Laughter, small at first, then growing as it found more mouths willing to repeat it. A promotion then, from petrol to Prosecco, quite the career arc. Valencia set a glass down at a table of 4 executives and moved to the next one without changing her pace. She had learned long before Seoul that the most powerful response to cruelty was indifference. Not performed indifference, real indifference. The kind that came from knowing exactly who you were regardless of who was laughing. Across the ballroom, Jaehyun watched from beside a marble pillar and allowed herself a small, private satisfaction. It was working exactly as planned. What she had not planned for was Sihan. He had seen Valencia the moment she stepped onto the main floor. He had gone very still in a way that Junsa, standing 2 feet to his right, immediately noticed. He had started moving through the crowd with a directness that had nothing to do with the evening's agenda. He was 4 tables away when the main doors opened again. The room did what rooms do when someone significant enters. It shifted. A subtle redistribution of attention. Heads turning without people realizing they were turning. An elderly man walked in, European. Impeccably dressed. The kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and private galleries and conversations that shaped things. He moved slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had long since stopped needing to impress anyone. He scanned the room, then he stopped. The glass in his hand slipped. His assistant caught it. The old man was already moving, cutting directly through the ballroom in a straight line that parted guests without a single word spoken. People stepped aside without knowing why. There was something in his bearing that made the crowd simply open for him. He stopped in front of Valencia. The laughter in the nearby tables died first. Then the conversations around them. Then a wider silence that moved outward through the room like something had been dropped into still water. The old man looked at her for one long moment. Then he bowed, not a polite greeting, not a social gesture. A genuine bow. The kind reserved for people of significance, so absolute it needed no explanation. When he straightened, his eyes were bright. "Ms. Roth," he said, and his voice, though quiet, carried with complete clarity through a room that had gone absolutely silent. "We have been searching for you for 2 years." Surname moved through the ballroom like a current. Roth, she heard the gasps before she saw the faces. Executives straightened. A politician 2 tables away went pale. 3 conversations stopped mid-sentence and did not resume. Someone's champagne glass met the table with more force than intended. Valencia stood very still. Across the room, Jaehyun's expression collapsed in slow motion. And Sihan, 4 tables away, completely unmoving, looked at the woman he had watched pump fuel, deflect his questions, refuse to flinch, and send him away from a gas station with 6 words that had not left him since. He looked at her standing in the center of that silence. And understood with the particular clarity of a man who prided himself on reading every room that he had not read this one at all. The room went silent, and every single person who had laughed, every voice that had called her a gas station girl, every face that had found her uniform amusing, went completely, irreversibly quiet. I need you to feel that for a moment. Because Valencia never asked for that silence, she never fought for it. She simply stayed, through every laugh, every dismissal, every moment someone made her feel small in a room she was too good for. And if you have ever stayed in a room that didn't deserve you, kept working, kept moving, kept your head up when it would have been so much easier to walk out, then you already know exactly how this moment feels. Don't let this story go now, because the silence was just the beginning. What happens when it breaks goes beyond our imagination. The ballroom found its voice again in pieces, first the whispers, then the shifting of chairs as people leaned toward each other with the urgent energy of those who understood they had just witnessed something they would be describing for years. Valencia did not move for 3 full seconds, then she looked at Elias, at the face she had last seen at her father's funeral, older now, more tired, and something passed between them that required no audience and no explanation. "Tonight, Elias," she said quietly. "Tonight." He read her face the way only someone who had known her since childhood could. Then he nodded once and stepped back. She set her serving tray on the nearest table carefully without a sound and turned to face the room. The executives who had laughed were not laughing now. The socialites who had whispered were studying the floor or the ceiling or anywhere that was not her face. A politician near the back had developed a sudden urgent interest in his phone. Jaehyun stood beside her pillar. Her plan had been precise, controlled, designed to produce one specific outcome. What it had produced instead was a room full of witnesses to the moment Jaehyun publicly humiliated the heir to the Roth fortune. The political consequences of that miscalculation were still arriving. She could see them forming in the faces around her like clouds before weather. She left through the side exit without speaking to anyone. Across the room, Sihan had not moved. He had the background check results. He had read them in the station car park with Valencia standing 20 feet away and understood that her records were not incomplete by accident. They had been deliberately, professionally sealed. He had filed that information and said nothing. Roth had not been in the report. But standing in that ballroom watching Elias bow, watching an elderly European billionaire treat a woman in a service uniform like visiting royalty, Sihan understood that what he had filed was not the whole file, not even close. He watched Valencia move through the room with the same composure she carried at the pump. Unhurried, unperformed. Giving nothing away to the people now watching her with very different eyes than they had an hour ago. She was heading for the exit. He knew that walk. He had watched it leave him 4 times at a gas station on the Muppa highway. He moved, but before he reached the door a hand closed on his arm. Junsa appearing from somewhere to his left, voice low and urgent. "There are 3 people in this room right now," Junsa said quietly, "who had significant financial interest in Valencia Roth remaining unfound." Sihan went still. "Of them are already on their phones," Junsa said. Sihan looked toward the exit. The door was already closing behind her. He found her on the terrace, not hiding, not fleeing, just standing at the stone railing with her back to the ballroom and her face to the city, the way a person stands when they need a moment to let something settle before they decide what to do with it. She heard him come through the door. She didn't turn around. "You're new," she said, not an accusation. Just a fact she was placing on the table between them. Sihan stopped a few feet behind her. The background check came back incomplete. "Deliberately sealed. I knew you weren't who you appeared to be." "You didn't say anything." Nah, she turned then. Looked at him directly in the way she always did, clean and unhurried, giving him the full weight of her attention. Held her gaze. "Because whoever you were before, the woman at the pump was real. I wasn't willing to take that apart until I understood what I was dealing with." City spread out behind her, all light and distance. "And now you understand." "No, I have a surname," he said. "I don't think that's the same thing." Something moved across her face, small, the kind of thing she would have caught and contained 2 months ago without effort. It surprised her that she couldn't fully contain it anymore. "I came here because I was tired," she said. "Not of work, not of responsibility. I was tired of being looked at and seeing the calculation happen. The mental arithmetic of what she's worth, what access to her means. What marrying her would fix." A pause. "I wanted one person, one to look at me and just say, yeah," he said quietly. She looked at him. He didn't look away. "I saw you before I knew your name," he said. "I bought fuel I didn't need 4 times because a woman in a blue uniform was the most honest thing in my week." Silence between them was the warmest it had ever been. Then his phone went. He read the message from Junsa. Read it again. His entire bearing changed in 3 seconds, not dramatically, but in the specific way of a man shifting from one mode into another completely. "Need you to come with me right now," he said. "Sihan, Valencia." The name, her real name, first time he had said it, landed differently than anything else in the conversation. "There are people in that building who just made phone calls about you. I need you somewhere they cannot reach." She looked at him. For 2 years she had been the one deciding when to leave and where to go next. She searched his face for the calculation she had spent 2 years running from. She didn't find it. "All right," she said. He took her to a private floor of the Kwon Group building, not his residence, not a hotel, somewhere in between, a space that felt lived in without being personal. The city was quiet at this hour. 2 cups of tea that appeared without either of them asking for them. Valencia sat with hers and looked at the skyline for a long time. Sihan sat across from her and did not rush the silence. That was the thing about him she had not expected. For a man who controlled every room he entered, he had a remarkable capacity for stillness. He never filled quiet with noise just to prove he was comfortable. He simply waited, and his waiting never felt like pressure. "My father died 14 months before I came here," she said finally. He said nothing, just listened. At the funeral there were 400 people, business partners, family, associates, people who had known him for decades. She turned the cup in her hands. "I spent the entire service watching their faces and trying to find one person who was there just because they loved him. Not what he represented, not what his passing changed for them financially. Just him." She paused. "I couldn't find one." City glittered beyond the glass. "Then I looked at my own life and I asked myself the same question. If I disappeared tomorrow, not dead, just disappearance, who would come looking for me because they missed me? Not the name, not the access. Not the inheritance." She set the cup down. "I couldn't answer that either." "So you disappeared," Sihan said quietly. "I disappeared." She looked at him directly. "Not to run away from something, not to chase anyone. I came here because I needed to know if it was even possible, for someone like me, to be chosen for absolutely nothing." Word nothing sat between them with its full weight. Sihan looked at her, at the woman who had handed him his fuel receipt 4 times without flinching, who had told him her rescue cost her something, who had stood in a ballroom full of people recalibrating their entire opinion of her and felt like the only settled thing in the room. "I accelerated the acquisition," he said. Jinsu questioned it. "I told him the location was strategic." She waited. Location was not strategic. Valencia looked at him for a long moment. "You bought a gas station," she said slowly. Something unlocked in her chest that she had been holding shut for 2 years. She almost smiled. "Almost. That," she said, "is either the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard or," he said. The word landed between them like a door opening. Before either of them could walk through it, Jinsu entered without knocking, which told Valencia everything about the urgency before he said a single word. "The 3 calls from the gala," he said, looking only at Sihan. "One of them has already moved." Sihan stood. The warmth in the room did not disappear, but it stepped aside for something colder and more immediate. He looked at Valencia. "Much do you trust me?" he asked. She thought of 2 years spent building walls in a city that didn't know her name. She thought of everything she had come to Seoul to find and where she had found it. "Enough," she said. "That will have to do for now." The 2 men were waiting when Sihan stepped out of the elevator. They didn't look like men who expected to be caught. They looked like men who had prepared for exactly this, lawyers who had spent careers making other people's problems sound like administrative errors. Sihan opened the conference room door. They went in. He set his phone on the table. 1 document, 14 months of transactions. The older partner barely glanced at it. "You have no standing here," he said. Valencia Roth was legally absent. Everything Harmon Vale administered was within the boundaries of Korean and European estate law. "What you're holding is documentation we'll bury in 3 jurisdictions before morning." Sihan said nothing. The younger one leaned forward. "And while we're being direct, you accelerated a business acquisition to position yourself near a missing heiress. How does that read to court?" That one landed, not visibly. Not in any way either man across the table would have caught. But Sihan felt it settle somewhere behind his ribs, the specific discomfort of a truth being used as a weapon by people who had no right to use it. He picked up his phone. "Right," he said. "My acquisition can be questioned. That conversation is worth having." He turned the screen toward them one final time. "This one isn't. Signature 31. April. That isn't a legal grey area. That is fraud. And Elias Roth's attorneys have had the original documents for 14 months. Older man's jaw tightened. "Civil proceedings begin tomorrow," Sihan said. Whether you cooperate changes only how long this takes, not how it ends. Both men stood at the door. The younger one turned back. She chose an interesting protector, he said. Sihan looked at him evenly. She didn't choose me for protection, he said quietly. That part is incidental. Door closed. He remained in the room alone for a moment longer than necessary. By noon, the three partners were facing criminal proceedings that would erase them from the industry. The dominoes fell across the city. Jae-yoon's fall was quieter, but just as final. A public statement from her father's office confirmed the end of her influence had reached its limit. She didn't call Sihan, he didn't call her. Sihan stood at the window, watching the sunset. Jae-yoon was in her private office, staring at the empty desk as if she could force the world back into the order she had dictated only a few hours ago. She heard the door click. She didn't look up. If you're here to gloat, Jae-yoon said, her voice tight, you've wasted your time, it's over. Valencia stood in the doorway. She didn't walk in. She just stood there, observing the scene like someone looking at a minor, unimportant glitch in a very large machine. I'm not here to gloat, Jae-yoon, Valencia said. Her voice was steady, utterly devoid of malice. It was a tone of pure, chilling indifference. I'm here to tell you that I never gave you a second thought. Jae-yoon looked up then, her eyes searching for a crack in Valencia's composure. She found nothing. You were an obstacle, Valencia continued, turning to leave. And obstacles are moved. I didn't come to Seoul to fight for space in your world, I came to build my own. As Valencia walked away, she didn't look back. And Jae-yoon was left in the room, realizing with sudden, crushing clarity, she hadn't been a rival. She had been nothing more than a footnote. Valencia walked up beside him. The air between them no longer felt charged with secrets. It felt clean. It's done, he said. Valencia looked out at the city, the place she had tried to run from and the place that had eventually forced her to stand her ground. It's done, he said. Is it? She asked. Or is it just beginning? Sihan turned from the glass. He didn't look at the city anymore. He looked at her. The woman who had come to Seoul to disappear, only to be found by the one person who cared enough to learn the shape of her silence. That depends, he said. What were you looking for when you came to that station, Valencia? Before you were a name on a legal document, before you were a liability. She looked out at the skyline, the same view she had studied every night for 2 years. I was looking for a room, she said quietly. A place where the walls didn't have ears. Where the air didn't have a price tag. I wanted to see if I could be ordinary. And I realized, she said, turning back to him, that ordinary isn't a place, it's a choice. You can be extraordinary in a boardroom or behind a fuel pump if the person standing in front of you is looking at you and not the reflection of their own interests. She stepped closer to him. The distance that had been there for months, the boardroom distance, the class distance, the employer-employee distance, had finally dissolved. I didn't come to Seoul to hide, Sihan. I came to see if I was enough all on my own. The gravity between them was already absolute. You were never just a name, Valencia, he said, and you were never just a worker. You were the only honest thing in my life, and I think perhaps we're done with pretending otherwise. 3 days after the boardroom reckoning, a black sedan pulled into the Muppa highway station. The sun was low, casting long, golden shadows across the forecourt. Valencia stepped out. No uniform, no pretense. Just a woman standing in the center of the forecourt, breathing in the scent of gasoline and highway wind. Sihan stepped out behind her. He didn't walk like the man who had bought the station to hunt a ghost. He walked like a man coming home. Mama Joy was in the office, watching the monitor. When they walked in, she didn't look surprised. She simply reached under the counter and produced the mug with Valencia's name on it. I kept it, she said. I'm not coming back, Valencia said. No, Mama Joy replied, smiling. This city suits you. To the introspection, the core of your original Sarch Fufton. Valencia set the mug down and looked at Sihan. He hadn't sent a driver. He had come himself, the small gestures that cost him the performance of being unbothered. She had come to Seoul asking one question, can a woman like me be loved for nothing? She had her answer. He hadn't just been chosen, she had been seen. I'm not taking the European position, she said, looking at the city skyline. I'm establishing the Roth presence here. Seoul, I want to build something that's mine, not inherited, mine. No, he said. 6 months later, Valencia Roth opened the Seoul offices of Roth Advisory. It wasn't a gala, it was a dinner. Elias was there, Junsa was there. Mama Joy was there, dressed to the nines, telling everyone she knew the boss before the firm existed. Sihan sat beside her for the entire evening. Not behind her, not managing her, beside her. He refilled her glass once without being asked. She noticed she hadn't come to Seoul to be rescued. She came to find out if she was worth choosing. And the most powerful man in the city had answered that question without being asked. If this story found something real inside you, if Valencia's question has ever been your question, if you have ever walked into a room and wondered whether anyone in it could see past everything you carry to the person underneath, then you already know this channel was made for you. Don't let it go. Tap that button below and stay with Noir Desires, because every story we tell is for the woman who kept moving, the one who refused to be made small. And if that woman is you, you deserve every story that comes next.